Welcome to Get Into the Act. I'm your host, John Berg, with the Sacramento County Office of Education. Get Into the Act is a series of video presentations brought to you by the California Department of Education's Middle and High School Improvement Office. Renowned educators who are passionate about student learning and achievement will share research-based strategies to help middle grades teachers ensure success and close the achievement gap for their students. Each presentation focuses on one or more of the 12 Taking Center Stage Act 2 recommendations. Dr. Janet Zadina is a cognitive neuroscientist, reading specialist, and former high school and community college instructor. She received her doctorate in the College of Education at the University of New Orleans, conducting her award-winning dissertation research on the neuroanatomy of dyslexia through collaboration with Tulane University School of Medicine. She continued her postdoctoral education with a fellowship in cognitive neuroscience in the Department of Psychiatry and Neurology at Tulane University School of Medicine. She is currently engaged in neuroscience research as an assistant professor in cognitive neuroscience in the Department of Psychiatry and Neurology at Tulane and in psychology at the University of South Florida. Dr. Zadina is author of 6 Weeks to a Brain-Compatible Classroom, a workbook for educators, and is also the founder of Brain Research and Instruction. This is the second session of a 4-part series of videos by Dr. Janet Zadina. In this video segment, Dr. Zadina's focus will be part 1 of adolescent characteristics, the survival instinct and development of the brain.
Welcome to Get Into the Act. I'm Dr. Janet Zadina, a cognitive neuroscientist and former teacher of English and reading, and I'm presenting today the second in a series of 4 videos. As you may recall, my specialty is helping educators understand the new brain research and what it might mean to us. In the first video, we looked at a general understanding of how the brain learns. In this video and the next one, we're going to look at some adolescent characteristics, because this is a very special time for the brain. As you're going to see, the brain is going through a lot of changes in adolescence. So we definitely want to know more about that. Now, if you look on the Taking Center Stage Act 2 website, in the navigation pane on the left, you'll see some buttons that you can push that tell you more about adolescent characteristics. What I'm going to do today is talk about 2 characteristics: the survival instinct and brain development. Then in the next video, we'll look at 2 more characteristics: the social nature of the brain and the role of emotion. Of course, these are all very closely related. Now, James Zull said that learning is a biological process for survival. This is huge, and I think it's a new way of looking at learning for educators. We often think of it as a kind of a vague mental process, but really it involves the entire body. In many ways, the body tells the brain what is important, and then the brain says, I'm going to pay attention because I might need this for survival. Of course, in our society, it might be economic survival or social survival or whatever. Now, how does the body tell the brain something is important? It alerts, it pays attention. We call this the arousal network or the attention network. For example, when I first started teaching, before I knew about the arousal or attention network, I used to say to my students at the beginning of school, all right, everybody, sit like you're an F student. And they would just slouch down in their chairs. Then I would say, now sit like you're an A student. And they would sit up real straight. And I would say, well, if you know what the difference is, then I guess you can achieve that. There is a difference, isn't there, in the behavior. And I thought at the time it was behavior and attitude. But now I see it's also related to this arousal network. If the students are disengaged or very sleepy, they're not paying much attention. We want an appropriate level of arousal where the brain is paying attention. Now, the brain pays attention to what it considers important. Let's say there's a bully in the classroom. Well, their attention network is going to be paying attention to that instead of what you're teaching. So we have to keep in mind that there is this survival instinct that is driving what we pay attention to and how we learn. Learning also activates the reward pathway in the brain. The reward pathway keeps us alive as individuals and as a species. It's also called the pleasure pathway. If a behavior is pleasurable, then we are likely to repeat it. So anything that keeps us alive activates that pleasure pathway. For example, if you suddenly lose your pleasure in eating, then you quit eating, you would die. So the pleasure pathway is designed to keep us alive. Unfortunately, drugs of abuse hijack that pleasure pathway. But you know what also activates that pleasure pathway? Learning. Now, I didn't say school, but I said learning. Learning is rewarding to the brain. When we achieve something, figure it out, get that aha moment, or feel that we've made progress, we get a boost in that reward pathway. It's like a good drug to the brain, and it makes us happy. So that's something we want to keep in mind in the classroom, and I'm going to give you some ideas about how you can work with that information. Now let's talk about the kind of growth that the brain is going through at this time. The brain is changing a lot during adolescence. It's going through some growth spurts. One of the ways in which it's changing is that, remember when I talked in video 1 about all the connections that we have to make in the brain, all those dendrites that we're growing? Well, during adolescence, the brain goes through a huge growth in the number of these dendrites. The brain is just making lots of connections during this time, and there's like an overgrowth of this material in the brain. Now that will be followed in late adolescence by a pruning. Now, pruning is a complex subject, but just to touch on it so you understand, it means basically that processes or connections that were not strong or were not being used are reabsorbed into the brain. The brain is basically cleaning house and getting more efficient. But this is something for us to keep in mind during adolescence, and this is why middle school is such an important time, because they are making all of these connections in the brain, and it will be followed by a pruning. There's also, according to a recent study, a growth in the language area of the brain during this time. So that leads us to think, according to this research, that middle school is a great time for students to learn a second language or a foreign language. Now, I would say that it's certainly, if you haven't done so already, then this is the time to do it. The earlier, the better. But during middle school is an ideal time to focus on language learning. Another change that's going on in the brain is so important. It's probably the most important thing to education, and that is the frontal lobes are developing. This is called the executive center of the brain. Now, how many of you have said, my students just can't think critically? It's a big concern for teachers. I think once you understand how critical thinking takes place and the role of the frontal lobes, you'll see why it's difficult for students and how we can make it easier. The frontal lobes are called the executive center. What does an executive do? An executive makes decisions, manages time and resources, delays gratification, analyzes a situation, evaluates it. They inhibit their impulses, then they use good judgment. And that's what the frontal lobe does. The frontal lobe development is essential to healthy, happy, law-abiding citizens. This is what enables people to succeed in the world. There's been some research that shows that criminals often have damage to the frontal lobes, and they can't control their impulses or delay gratification or whatever. Now, the question is always nature versus nurture. The frontal lobes develop in conjunction with experience, just like the rest of the brain. Our genes and nature may set some parameters, but experience modifies that. So the middle school is an ideal time to be giving students tasks that help them develop the frontal lobes by giving them frontal lobe type tasks. And I'm going to cover that for you today. So let's look at some of the recommendations that you can find throughout the Taking Center Stage Act 2 website. Now I'm going to hit on a few of the ideas contained there now. What does it mean when we think about the brain in terms of survival and in terms of the growth of the frontal lobes in the classroom? Well, first of all, let's look at some of the recommendations relating to survival and arousal. Real life experiences are going to kick in with that survival instinct. The brain pays attention if the brain thinks it might need this to survive. And again, it might just be academic survival or social survival, emotional survival, but whatever is meaningful to the brain. So real life experiences are a great way to capitalize on how the brain naturally works. Meaningful participation is very important. The students at this time are very concerned about survival. Adolescence, especially middle school, is a time when they're moving a little more away from the family and out into the world and out into more experiences, and they're starting to think about who will I be in the world and what will I do. And so this is a time when the survival instinct might be heightened and their awareness of all of this. If you give them opportunities for meaningful participation in the classroom, you're showing them, you know, I have a role in school and I have a role in the world. And you're making them feel stronger and secure at the same time that they're learning. Now, if you've worked with middle school students, there's one thing that you know. It's all about me. It's all about them, isn't it? They think they're walking around with a big spotlight on them, and everybody's looking at them, and everybody's listening to what they're saying and watching what they're doing and talking about them. And so it's a time when they're very uncomfortable with that, but they are very focused on themselves, and they're aware of that. So this is part of the survival instinct and what we've talked about. So I suggested in the classroom, well, make it all about them. Start with that. Start with them, and then you can work from the concrete to the abstract or from the individual to the global. For example, let's say you're talking about the government, and so you're going to talk about voting. Well, start with them. Should you have a say in what happens in the school policy, or just your elected leaders like the student body president? Should you have a say? Start with them. And then after they talk about that, get emotionally engaged, they're thinking about themselves in the world, then you can kind of step it up to the community, the state, or the nation. Another recommendation that's helpful during this time that the brain is changing and we look at the way that the brain works is using storytelling and narrative. A very recent study showed that when creative people are thinking, they're activating the same area that they activate when they're telling stories, whether it's a true story about what happened to them or a made-up story. Storytelling is ancient and powerful, and it kicks right in with that survival instinct because that's originally how culture was passed down. So stories are very meaningful. In video 4, I'm going to suggest multiple options that you can give students to demonstrate what they've learned. I would just like to mention now that explaining a lesson in story form is a great technique to use. Also, you want to engage the students in emotionally engaging activities. We talked about the attention and arousal network. They pay attention to what is important. Now, if you only give students tasks that require a short attention span, what do you think will eventually happen? Cells that fire together wire together. So you're creating stronger short attention spans rather than longer. So if you get them engaged in emotionally engaging activities, then that can increase their attention span because they're absorbed and focused. And it also enables them to address the material in a way they might not have been able to before. Let me give you a little story from when I taught school. I was teaching a group of only 7 adults how to write a theme, how to write an essay. But they were so frightened. This was years ago before I knew about this. And they were so worried. All they could hear in their head was essay, essay. And they were tuning out everything I told them because they didn't think that was essay. That must be something really more complicated than what she's saying. So they couldn't do it. So you know what I did? I brought it down to a meaningful, emotionally engaging, real-life activity. I let them read an article about whether boxing should be made illegal due to the blood exchange, and this was in Newsweek. And I let them argue and get all worked up, and pretty soon they couldn't hear each other's arguments. So I said, stop. You can't hear each other. I'll tell you what, if you write down your argument, I'll read it to the whole class. They wrote like the wind. Beautiful argumentative essays. Why? Because they had already thought about it, talked about it, and they were emotionally engaged, and the information flowed out on the paper. So then when I read it, I said, now that's an essay. And this young man said, you mean that's what writing is? That's all it is? Putting your ideas on paper? I can do that. And then we were off and running. So that's just an example of how you can work with this nature of the brain. Now, another thing we talked about was the reward pathway. Do you know what else activates that reward pathway besides learning and food and shopping? Collaborative learning. One study at Emory showed that working in collaboration activated the reward pathway. So putting students in collaborative groups is very helpful. And a very recent article, scientific article, hypothesized that one part of the reward pathway might be effort, that rigor is part of the reward pathway. Because when you work hard for something, the results are more pleasurable. And we all appreciate what has been harder to attain. When you make school too easy, you're not activating that reward pathway, maybe not involving the student. It should be challenging enough that they feel they could succeed with enough effort. So rigor is something else to keep in mind. Another thing that activates the reward pathway would be service projects as learning activities, because that brings out the altruism in the student, that brings out positive emotion, it's real life, it's based on survival, it's caring. So the material that they learn during these kinds of projects might be more easily learned because it's more meaningful and real and works with our nature. We talked about the language area and the frontal lobe development during this time. So a task for the classroom might be to give them activities that go from the concrete to the abstract. We have to help the frontal lobe develop by giving them appropriate activities that move maybe from the specific to the general or the concrete to the abstract. Rather than just giving them activities that involve critical thinking, we might have to step them along. Metacognitive tasks are very important during this time. This is definitely a frontal lobe task. Now, when I say that, the frontal lobe always works with the rest of the brain in processing information. All the parts of the brain work together. But metacognition is something that we develop as we develop the frontal lobes, the ability to think about what we're thinking. So I like to always give students an opportunity to do this type of thinking, and it can only take a minute or two in the classroom. One way to do this is to give them a ticket out the door. You might have 2 or 3 questions on a little slip of paper that they have to answer one of them before they can leave. And one of the questions might be, how well did you learn today? Or evaluate your performance in class today. How prepared are you for the test? The kinds of things that teach them how to reflect on their learning. This is also a great time for multicultural activities. Remember what I said that it's a growth spurt in the language area? It's very important to hear as many languages spoken as possible before the brain prunes away the ability to hear some of these sounds. So this is an ideal time to involve them in as many new experiences and multicultural activities as possible. There's a rapid growth of connections in the brain during this time. This is our chance to really capitalize on that. Middle school is an exciting time to teach children because their brains are changing in so many ways. So if they're making lots of connections, then we want to expose them to as much as possible during this time. Learning across the curriculum is ideal. This exposes them not only to many topics, but it enables them to make connections between different topics, which is very important, as you learned in video 1. Academic enrichment centers are very important at this time because if they're making a lot of connections, this is a time when we want them to be able to explore all kinds of things that they're interested in, to get help if they need it. If they haven't had an opportunity to learn a second language, this is a great time to do that, as we said. So academic enrichment centers can take advantage of this growth opportunity, their curiosity and their energy at this time. Finally, project-based learning. Now that's survival-oriented, isn't it, as we talked about? I'm guessing that in early days, building a fire, avoiding predators, seeking shelter was project-based learning. It kind of taps into that because a project is something that has to take place over a period of time, involves many tasks, leads to a specified outcome, you work with other people. It's the kind of thing we're going to do all of our lives, and it taps into our basic nature. So today we talked about two important characteristics of the adolescent, the survival instinct and brain development. In the next video, we're going to talk about the social nature of the brain and the role of emotion in the brain. In the meantime, if you look at the Taking Center Stage Act 2 website, on the left-hand side, the button on adolescent characteristics, you're going to find some wonderful information there. I'd like to leave you with this question. What kind of tasks can you give students that will engage the frontal lobes? But how can you help them engage them in context? Instead of giving them a question that is a critical thinking question, give them a task that causes them to think critically as they do it and help them develop those frontal lobes. Thank you for listening to this video, and get out there and get into the act.
You've just seen Dr. Janet Zadina discuss the survival instinct and development of the brain. To find more information and additional resources on this and related topics, go to pubs.cde.ca.gov/TCS2.